Questions, comments, things happen in other states. Governor Kelly.
Yeah, actually, Governor Bullock, I'm very intrigued by your discussion of Troy and the fact that you've got connectivity at your schools and you're looking for ways to expand that. I think there's actually an article in the New York Times today that talks about Cottonwood Falls, Kansas, where we have exactly the same thing. Cottonwood Falls is dead center, Kansas. So the school district has connectivity, but the community does not, and it's actually losing businesses, and certainly businesses are refusing to move in because they don't have this access. So you figured out some way to fund it for the school. Do you have a plan for funding to expand outside the school?
You know, the challenge, and it is a real challenge as much as for these smaller towns too, because on the one hand, it may not look like it's cost effective to even be laying the fiber along the way. I mean, I'd love to, not supposed to be putting pitches in for necessarily private companies, but we had folks from Deloitte that went up there and spent several weeks engaging all the stakeholders, really put together that plan of how that they can get there. And then we're doing it again with them for one of our tribal nations where connectivity just doesn't exist. And it's bringing all the stakeholders together, figuring out, but I don't have necessarily a pot of money that I can, from the state level, to give to a community like Troy. What I can do is try to marshal the resources and also recognize the myriad of programs that you can also get from a federal loan and grant program that exist. Other questions, comments, what you're doing in your state? Oh, Governor Burgum.
First of all, Governor Polis, Governor Bullock, congrats on all the great work you're doing. And I would say maybe it's a part of the question to Governor Kelly, but having the same issue of once we got all the schools connected in this interconnected world, we got to get it out to every combine, every tractor, every rancher on a horse, everybody that's out, monitoring any kind of energy activity. You got to get it to every of the 2,000 wind towers we have in our state, and some of that may have to go wireless, for that last mile. And so we're trying to explore a number of different things where, whether it's TV white spaces, which is spectrum that's available, whether it's other forms of extended wireless, but that's one of the things that we're trying to do because it's just not cost effective to actually string the fiber all that extra distance. But you guys are doing some great work. Keep it up. It's when your states do well, it makes we can use that as examples to help push stuff forward in ours. So we all climb the ladder when we're pushing each other. One thing I would say that when we get all the schools connected, which we got a gigabyte to every school in North Dakota, and did that through a combination of private sector plus a cooperative of all of the rural telephone cooperatives, and so that has created a thing called the Dakota Carrier Network across the rural co-ops, and they've laid the backbone, and then we're able to get everywhere. But then when we've got every school connected, now we run into the situation we talked about earlier with the cyber issues. So we did push through last year, which we think may be the first cyber curriculum for every grade level. And we wouldn't think about it like, what does a second grader have to know to be safe when they're connected doing their work at that school? What's a fourth grader have to know? What do you have to know in your junior high? So we've actually created a curriculum and built it in. So instead of just teaching computer science in high school, we're teaching cybersecurity skills at every grade level all the way through, and then also added cybersecurity as a course for people to be able to take in high school in addition to the computer science, because it's a growing field and there's hundreds of thousands of cyber jobs that are available. So it's got a both protect students but a long-term workforce component, and we'd be happy to share some of the work we did relative to building out that curriculum and getting it approved by K-12 and moving that forward.
That's great, Governor Burgum. I'd also say to Governor Kelly and others too, if you ask, let me have a map of my state and all of who has broadband access and who doesn't, it's not an easy thing to get, right? Because it's all private entities, and sharing that information makes it that much more difficult. I mean, we have been undertaking just trying to get broadband mapping. And another thing that I think we all have to think about, like we all talk about trying to get these big infrastructure projects and proposals through our legislature. And I've never included broadband as part of the definition of that infrastructure. You know, it's because there's such unmet water, sewer needs, schools, bridges. But we really do have to start thinking of it as not only that economic driver, but I think as base infrastructure. So if local communities like a Troy or the one that you referenced could also look to some pot of money at the state level as well to help facilitate that. Other thoughts, questions? Yes.
Yeah, actually, Governor Bullock, we have started to include it in our infrastructure plan. You know, we've got a new 10-year comprehensive transportation plan before the legislature right now, and part of that plan includes, you know, as long as digging, you know, and then lay the fiber. That won't get us the last mile, but it'll get us a long way down the road.
Governor Reynolds.
We have made an investment at the state level, and really for a relatively small investment, if you leverage private sector funding, you can really start to make a difference. So I asked the legislature for $20 million, which allowed me to leverage $120 million private sector funding. I was able to get 5. We had 1.3 held. So with 6.3 million, we were able to implement 17 projects in the state of Iowa. And then we stacked that with USDA funding that came in. We qualified for 4 projects. And so with relatively smaller investment, we've been able to really scale some of these rural areas and provide them the connectivity that they need to survive. We're not going to grow rural Iowa without connectivity. We're not going to get our young people to stay in those communities, and it impacts every single thing that we did. So I'm back this year asking for another $15 million to continue to leverage not only the private sector, but to take advantage of the federal funding that's there too. And I think they're coming out with more opportunities for states to take advantage of that.
It's great. And at the Western Governor's breakfast this morning, we had a number of cabinet folks there, and one of them said that there may be additional opportunities for federal dollars to either match or other complement, but also, Governor Hogan, as you're looking at, you'd mentioned earlier today, of trying to put together overall ideas for what the federal government could do. I mean, those investments in rural infrastructure, if we're ever really going to be that country where everybody has that opportunity to succeed educationally and economically, we can't leave rural communities behind, and that's an area where the federal government can help fill some of the gaps.